you start by introducing yourself, and then tell me like what you do, where you work, how long you've been doing it for, and maybe even like if you want to tell me a little bit about your background, you can.
Okay.
Just like kind of brief information.
Sure. Let me look at the camera. Yeah.
Yeah. You can
Okay. My name is Amy Grotta, and I work for Oregon State University Extension. I'm a forestry and natural resources extension agent in Northwest Oregon. And I've been with Extension for 14 years now. Part of that was in Washington State, and I've been with OSU for about 9 years now.
Okay. So you work at the agent level, and I was going to ask, what kind of advice has anyone given you earlier in your career, or even more recent in your career, that has kind of jumped out with you, stay with you, or advice that's kind of formulated in your head to share?
Yeah, I would say the thing that I learned early on is, and it wasn't something that someone told me, it was just something that I figured out, is that in Extension, there's never any shortage of interesting projects to work on. I mean, everything, if you're passionate about your job and your field and about Extension, then it's all interesting. You want to do it all. And there's, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you have to or that you should. And if you try to do it all, you just can't. You'll burn out. You'll take on too much. And so I think what I figured out at the beginning when I first started was that everything sounded like an interesting project. I jumped right in, and people were interested in having an agent back, and they wanted me to be involved in this project and that project, and I really enjoyed the landowners I was meeting, and I wanted to start new things. And I figured out that you have to pace yourself and not to take it all on at once. And sometimes you might have a great idea and something that seems like a really great project, but the best thing to do is just to put it on the shelf and let it sit for a while and let it percolate and wait a little while to let your ideas mature, and then down the road you might figure out, oh, that wasn't needed after all, or it matures into a better idea and it comes out better. So, pace yourself, and again, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should, and try to focus.
So we're kind of doing this course specifically for forestry and natural resource agents. So there's certain strong ties for ag agents in programs that exist, but sometimes maybe it's a little harder to parse out some of the forestry and natural resources audiences. So could you speak to what you've learned about some of your audiences, or in audiences being plural, like the different audiences you've worked with?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I learned, and that actually I think makes this job so rich, is that, well, for example, woodland owners is really a plurality of audiences, that not all woodland owners have the same needs. So, for example, in my area, we have families who have been managing their land for many, many years. They might have professional loggers in the family, and there's really not much that I can teach them on a technical level that they don't already know. But it doesn't mean they don't have needs. It just means that my educational outreach to them and what I do for them and with them is different from woodland owners who are brand new, who don't have much experience managing their land, have smaller acreages and that sort of thing. So it's important to realize that you can be different things to different people, and not to take it personally if some people don't show up at your programs. It's because that's not what they need. It's something else. And so what I found, for example, is with those experienced landowners, the best way that I can be of use to them is to be able to answer the phone call. They'll call me if they have a question or if they need something, and to be able to be someone, to be available to help them research a problem or research a question that they have. The newer landowners are the ones that are more likely to come to events, I think, and to programs. They're hungry for knowledge. And so, thinking in it's both and. Both are good and both are important.
Cool. Is there any experience you can think about that where something went really bad and you learned a big lesson, or sometimes under your control, sometimes not under your control, or like something that went really well, like a story that kind of just kind of sticks out in your mind that you might have told a few times or might have thought about a few times?
I think about that. Let me see. Well, I know one thing that I look back on is my very first year in extension. I kind of came into a position that had been held by another person for a number of years and had been sort of dormant, but they had tried to start a volunteer program, sort of like a master volunteer program, sort of like master woodland managers or master forest owners, that sort of thing. And I felt like I had to get that going again. Like, master volunteer programs are so great, we need to do this. And I put a lot of time and energy in trying to jumpstart this program that had been kind of dormant, try to re-energize a few volunteers that they had trained, and maybe train some new people without really doing much of a needs assessment. I hadn't, just because it had been done before, I felt like it had to be and it had been successful in other places, in other parts of the country. I'm like, I'm gonna do this too. And I look back on that and it didn't work. It was a failure. I couldn't get people to commit, and it just wasn't the right demographics for that kind of thing to work. And I look back and say, yeah, I should have waited. I should have gotten to know my area and my audience before I jumped into this.
Awesome. Is there any advice you, I guess one thing I always got asked people about the work-life home balance. Like, how do you keep yourself recharged or balance things out so you don't go?
Yeah, that's a very work-life balance is. I don't know if it's a myth. When I started my career in extension, I had a 2-year-old, and now I have a teenager and a middle schooler. So it's always been, family and work have always been two kind of competing demands on my time, and I have just learned to say no, and really prioritize those evenings and weekends that I give to my job for the most important things. If it's very easy, you could be busy every weeknight and every Saturday. Like I said, there's no shortage of interesting things to do, and you can let yourself go that route. I just didn't. I said, no, I'm gonna, I will work on Saturdays, but I will only do it when it's an absolute necessity. When I'm the one teaching or that sort of thing, as opposed to just going to a event where I'm not a critical role. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Let's see. I would say that to develop a really sorry again, just clear my throat. I would say that we're very fortunate within forestry and natural resources extension to have an organization like ANREP. I feel like I have gotten some of my best ideas for programming here at ANREP, and I have met people from across the country who I've ended up developing, working relationships with over decades. And there's not that many of us in this field. If you think about it, there's millions of doctors out there and millions of teachers, but there's not that many forestry extension agents. And so having ANREP as an organization to bring us together is really critical, because we're so spread apart across the country. So get involved and get to know your colleagues across the country.